Okay, in this tutorial we're going to pick up where we left off in the last tutorial after we made our backend template, and then we saved it as stories, and we created a link from our login page so we could link to it. So let me demonstrate that. So again, this is what the situation looks like on my backend as far as files. I have my login and log out, and then I have my stories page. And once I log in, I get my login page like you all have, and then I have stories, and I modified that page to say stories, so it picks up my stories page, and this is my stories page. So I'm going to go ahead and open that page. And again, sorry, it opens in my other monitor. So let me bring that over. And you see it's called stories.php. And there is my session valid user, so it's checking to see if I've already logged in, and I have, so it's showing me that on the back end. So the first thing I'm going to go do is modify this text here. So I'm going to call this stories, just so I can kind of indicate to the back end users that they're on the stories page. So if I refresh this page, it says stories. And what I want to do first is I'm going to create a table. Now I understand that you all haven't didn't read that chapter in interactive, so I would encourage you to read the tables chapter in learning web design, just like you all should have read the forms chapter. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and move this notes mode here above stories, and I'll change it on my template page as well. Now it's notes mode, so nothing's going to change if I refresh the page. So what I want to do first is I want to create a simple little table that it's going to show the stories that are in my database. So if I look in MySQL, you see I've run the select all from stories, and it's showing I've got 2 stories in my database. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a simple little HTML table on the back end just to start out with, so I can show you that. And this is just a quick little refresher if you have read the tables chapter. But if it's not, I'm going to quickly go through that. So the first element that we're going to create is tables. A table. And once I open the table element, I need to close the table element. And inside a table element, I'm going to tab over. And then what I want to do, inside tables, you have table rows. So I'm going to open and close the table row element. And then typically in tables, you have a table header. So I'm going to open a table header element, and I'm going to close the table header element. And inside this element, the content I'm going to do is I'm going to type story ID, and then I want another table header element. Oops, I created the Dreamweaver trying to figure out what I'm doing. So I'm going to write another table head element and close the TH. And inside there, I'm going to do story, or I'm just going to type headline actually. And then what I want to do is I'm going to have 2 blank, did another TR for me, is I'm going to create 2 more table header elements, and I'm going to have no content inside them. And you'll see why here in just a moment. So if I save this and refresh my page, you'll see it's starting to pull in that content. It doesn't quite look like a table yet, but we'll do that in a second. So that's the table header, and what I want to do after that is create another TR, a table row, then close the TR, and inside there I want to create a table data, or TD element. And this is where story ID will go, so I'm just going to put a number there for now, just a placeholder text. And you got to make sure these align. So for this table H, this is the TD that comes below it. For the table headline, I'm going to create another TD, and I'm going to type test headline. I'm going to close the TD. Then I have 2 more columns here to fill out, so I need to do TD again, and here I'm going to type update, close the TD, and then I'm going to create another TD element, and here I'm going to have delete. And that sort of sums up so we can get a sense of what this table is going to look like on the back end. So let me refresh the page. So you see here now, story ID, this is lined up. Table, the headline TD, or sorry, table header is lined up under table headline. Then I have update and delete. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and give those dummy Ahrefs. So I'm going to get in here and I'm going to wrap this test headline with the Ahref, and I'm just going to create an href attribute, and I'm going to leave it blank for now. And then I need to close the anchor element over here, and I'm going to do the same thing for my update. Then I'm going to close the anchor element. And you'll have to excuse the text is wrapping because I've got the font so big so you all can see it in the tutorial. And I want to do the same thing for another anchor element. I'm pasting in what I copied earlier with this sort of just empty value for the href attribute. Then I'm going to close the anchor element, save that, and refresh the browser. So now these are links. Now they're dead links because I haven't filled in the value for the href attributes. So when I click them, it just refreshes the page. And once we actually query the database and populate this table, we'll see how this will start looking more like a page that we want. I'm sorry, the layout that we want. So this is what your page should look like at this point. So I'm going to go back to my element. And what we want to do here is that we eventually want to query the database and populate this element with content that's coming from MySQL. So again, in MySQL, you see I have section IDFK, story teaser, story text, story published, story updated. We don't really need to add story publisher, story updated at this point. We'll probably add that in at the end of the tutorial, so I'll demonstrate how to do that. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to connect to the database, we need to query the database, and then we need to populate this table row and these TDs with the results from the query. So what I need to do is I'm going to open my login table because it's got our connection information inside there. So again, we're going to start seeing that we just start copying and pasting things from other files so we can get going. So what I want to do first, I'm going to copy this connection from our logins table. Now remember, this is the connection to the database itself. This is connecting to the server. And then we have my login information that connects to MySQL. Then I have my password, and then I'm telling MySQL which database I'm connecting to. And then we have this conditional that checks to make sure the connection is accurate. And then we have an error check. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to bring that over into my stories table. And then what I need to do to paste that, I need to open PHP. Oops. I need to open PHP and then close it. And then inside there, I'm going to paste my database connection. So I'm going to get everything lined up here. So what I'm saying now, after it gets down, the browser, it's actually the server processes this. It sees the PHP script. It connects to the database. And then after I connect to the database, I'm going to go back to my login page. And I'm going to copy this query line of code. But I'm going to modify the query once I get it into my stories page. So I'm going to paste that in. And what I want to do now is I want to select all from stories, just like we do when we're working in MySQL. So you see, if I get into MySQL, that if I run select all from stories and run it, it selects every element from the stories table. And that's okay for what we want to do. You'll see later that we're going to start, instead of this asterisk symbol, we can start specifying columns. I'm not going to do that in this tutorial, but I will demonstrate that later. So we've got our query. So I'm going to go back to our login page. I'm going to copy this result. This actually runs the query. This line here runs the query, and it takes the results of the query and bundles it in the result variable. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it underneath my query. So that runs the query. So I can save this at this point and refresh the page, and nothing should happen. So the page looks the same. And then this is where it starts changing. This is where we're adding something different. Is that I am going to create it's very similar to a conditional, and it's a while statement. And so, I will have talked about this in class before we do these tutorials, so this will make sense when you are watching the tutorial. But what I want to do is I want to get into my stories page, and I want to write a while statement. So while, and then it has a state it's checking for, and I'm going to create a row variable. I'm going to make that equal to the result variable, and then I'm going to pipe that into a function in PHP called the fetch assoc, which is fetching, taking the result that appears, for example, in MySQL that creates this sort of table. And what this function is doing that I'm writing is that it breaks this off into an associative array. And if you'll remember from chapter 1 in the PHP book that talks about associative arrays. So I'm going to finish writing this function, open close parentheses again. And then I'm going to create a curly brace. And what I'm going to do right now, excuse me, I actually put this in the wrong place. So we're going to move this whole PHP script we're writing. So I'm going to Command X, and I'm going to put that in between the table header table row and then the table data table row. So I'm going to paste that in. And just like a conditional, since I opened the curly brace, I need underneath the table row, I'm going to go ahead and open PHP and close that curly brace. And you see that my errors went away. So now, effectively what I've done is that I've created the HTML markup, I've run a database connection to connect to MySQL, I've created a query, and then I've executed the query. And what I'm doing is that for every row that results from the query, it's going to build a TR based on this information to appear on the back end. So if we look at MySQL and I run my query select all from stories, just like I've coded into my PHP page, select all from stories, we see that it results in 2 rows. So I have 2 stories in my database, or in my table. So what should happen when I come back and refresh this page in my browser, it should show me this stuff repeated twice. And that's exactly what we want. So let me go ahead and click on the browser, refresh the page, and it says I have a problem here. I have an error on line 46. So it looks like I have an error. And I'm not seeing it right away what it is. While fetch assoc. Well, and what it's, and this is the problem actually, I see it. I don't have this query written correctly, and that's why on my page it's saying that the fetch assoc has no object to create an associative array from. And the problem is I have an error here in my query, so I need to select all from stories. So let me save that. Now if I refresh the page, it's going to give me 2 rows. So what it's done, it's populated the content that I typed in here. And for each row that was in my database, it created a row to match. So what I need to do at this point is I need to use this fetch ASOC and this row variable to start populating this one with actual information from the database, this test headline from the database, and that's all I really need to do. So what I want to do at this point is I want to modify this number 1. So I'm going to open and close PHP, and now I can open and close PHP at any point in my markup. So I'm going to open, close PHP. I'm going to copy and paste this where my test headline is. And what I need to do is write some information inside this open and close PHP script. So what I want to do is I want to reference the row variable that I created here. And I'm going to drill down into story ID. And that is referencing, this story ID is referencing the column names that appear in my stories table. So row variable, which I created here, and I'm piping in the story ID. So I'm going to close that bracket and then hit semicolon. So if I save that and refresh the page, oh, I've got a problem there. Let's see what I've done. And what I need to do is I need to echo the result from that. So if I save this, you see now it's starting to populate 1, 2, 1, 2. And then if I'm going to copy and paste that echo statement and paste it in between this PHP, but I need to change story ID to story headline. And if I refresh the page, you can see now there is a corresponding headline for each row exactly how it is in my stories table. So now I'm effectively have pulled and populated my back-end stories page with stories that appear in my table. Now again, these are dead links, and eventually when we click here, what am I doing? We actually won't, we're gonna do something different here. But when I click here, that's going to take me to a page so I can update the stories. And if I click here, it would delete them. So we're going to make some changes later, but just to show you, demonstrate this process. So this page is dynamic now. So if I go back into MySQL and I insert a new story, so let's do insert stories into, insert into stories. So just like the insert command we use when we were using MySQL, I'm going to identify the columns that I want. So section ID FK, story headline. Now I have to enter these values because I set them up when I created the table as they are not null. So I have to enter all of them. So story teaser, story text, story published. Now I don't need to do story updated because the way I built the table, and I can talk about that in class if you have any questions. So I'm going to create values, and then I enter the values. Now my sections are 1 and 2, so I'm just going to push 2 right now. Oh, I seem to have a problem with my script. So values, I'm going to put the number 2. For story headline, it's a string value, so I'm going to type in, let's do man bites kitten, string value, comma. I'm going to type in the story teaser. I'm just going to use some home key pounding. For story text, I'm going to do some home key pounding again. And then for story published, I'm going to write in current. It's not a string value, timestamp. And I inserted that. So now if I do select all from stories, you see I have 3 stories. So if I refresh this page now, it's going to show me 3 stories. And so there are my 3 stories. So now we've created this back-end situation where the stories that are in the database dynamically appear on our back-end. So what I want to do now is these stories are doing from oldest to newest. at the bottom. So typically for content management systems, whether it's a blog or it's a website where you can edit stories, we want them to do the most recent at the top. So I'm going to modify my query here. So select all from stories, and I'm going to do order by, and what I'm going to do is order by story published, and that is referencing the column story published that has a timestamp in it. And I'm going to do story published, and we're going to do that descending order. So once I save that and refresh the page, you'll see these stories will invert themselves. So now the most recent story appears on top. Now what I'm going to do, instead of having update here, because eventually we're going to create a story where we click here, that's what allows us to update stuff, I'm going to change this update column, and I'm going to use that as a timestamp. So when someone on the back end can see, they can see what the dates the stories are. So I'm going to get rid of my anchor element, and in my TD, in my table header row, instead of empty, I'm going to go up here and write timestamp. I'm going to refresh the page. And what I want to do now is dynamically populate the timestamp in this row. So I'm going to go back down here. I'm going to copy and paste this object right here. I'm going to paste it where it says update, and I'm going to change story ID to story published. If I can remember how to spell. And so now if I refresh the page, you'll see that it tells you the time that the date that the story was posted, as well as the time it was posted. So that's how we create our stories table. In the next tutorials, we're going to do delete, and eventually we're going to start updating, and then eventually we'll do our posting. So we're creating a back-end situation where we can edit, delete, select, which we've already done, and then also, we're doing the CRUD functionalities on the back end. So on our back end of our website, we're looking to create, which is insert, and that's what will take care of the post situation. We're doing read, which is select, so we're already running the select query on our back end to show us all our stories on their back end. We're going to do update, and update will be taken care of when we click on these links that are dead right now. So we'll update, and then delete we'll do in the next tutorial.